All right, I've got a question for all you fans of this show. Why is it that every time Donald Trump slaps a tariff on Canada, it's front page news for literally weeks, but when China does it, when China crushes Canadian farmers and exporters with tariffs that are sometimes double, triple, even quadruple what Trump ever imposed on us, it's barely even a whisper in the Canadian media. Why is it that when Trump goes elbows up on his own in a trade fight, Ottawa sends Chrystia Freeland or Melanie Jolie or Dominic LeBlanc running to Washington as fast as they can, like their hair is on fire? But when China delivers a sledgehammer blow to our economy, no one boards a plane to Beijing. Are we terrified? I mean, we literally hear nothing. We see nothing. And somehow, as Canadians, we're just swallowing this as normal. This is not an accident. This is not an oversight. This is the Canadian political establishment and our mainstream media making a deliberate choice here to keep you in the dark about just how bad China's trade war with Canada has become. And the question that we have to ask today ourselves on this episode is why? Who benefits from all of this silence? And is our own Prime Minister, Mark Carney, compromised by his history of deep ties to Chinese financial institutions? Well, strap in, because this is one of those episodes where the deeper you go, the uglier it gets. Let's go.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
Welcome back to Bakes on Things. I'm Chris Baker. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment to the show down below. Make sure you get your thoughts out. Let's lay out the facts, because in March of this year, 2025, Beijing imposed 100% tariffs on Canadian canola oil, on canola meal, and on peas. 100%. That means if you're a Canadian farmer trying to sell into China, historically one of our largest markets for these products, you're done. You're priced out of it completely. Then they added 25% duties on Canadian pork and seafood. And just a couple of months later, they came back for more, slapping a so-called anti-dumping duty of 75.8% on Canadian canola seed. That's basically Beijing saying, thanks very much, Canada, but we don't want your product, so don't bother even trying to ship it. And do you understand how devastating this is to our prairie farmers? Probably not, because nobody's talking about it. But our prairie farmers are losing hundreds of millions of dollars. Entire supply chains are completely disrupted. The canola sector alone is out almost $1 billion. And yet, how many Canadians even know that all of this happened? If Trump had done this, if Trump had slapped 100% tariffs on any Canadian exports, there would be absolute outrage from especially Doug Ford. Wall-to-wall coverage, protests in Ottawa. Instead, because it's China, it's quietly buried in the back pages of business sections, if it's even reported in our mainstream media at all. So what is it about this media cover-up? Why the silence? Part of it is that the pain isn't hitting the average grocery bill in downtown Toronto. That's part of it. When Trump's tariffs targeted steel and aluminum, Canadian manufacturers screamed, workers screamed, and the media had a story that they could put every night on the newscast. But when China goes after canola and pork, the victims are prairie farmers and fishing communities. And let's be honest, our mainstream media has never cared about the West. They've never cared about our fishing communities or our farmers. And so they have never really made much of these voices. But It's more than that. There's also a conscious choice being made to antagonize China in the headlines. The liberals don't want a national debate, right? They don't want the national debate about how badly China is punishing us because that would raise uncomfortable questions about their foreign policy. You know, the one where we send all that money to Ukraine? Yeah, that foreign policy. And Canadian media, much of it cozy with corporate advertisers and government grants, is only too happy to oblige. Instead of shining a spotlight, they turn down the dimmer switch. They don't want to embarrass the government and they don't want to fuel anti China sentiment. And they certainly don't want to ask whether Mark Carney himself may be conflicted by his past dealings with Beijing. But the good thing is, you have us and we have you. And you can have this discussion in the comments below, and we can have this discussion in our episodes to talk about our very Prime Minister's potential conflicts. Because here's where we get to the heart of the matter entirely. Before becoming Prime Minister, Mark Carney wasn't some neutral professor of economics living in a monastery. He was a high-level executive at Brookfield Asset Management, one of the biggest Canadian investment firms in the history of this country and now in the world. And under his watch, Brookfield built up billions of dollars of investments in China. Carney himself reportedly met with Xi Jinping. He cultivated deals with Chinese state-linked companies, and he helped Brookfield secure loans from the Bank of China, as we heard during the campaign. But it all went silent because the media refused to cover much of it. He was an enthusiastic participant in opening the global financial system to Beijing. There's literally places where he's given speeches about it. Now, to be clear, he put his assets in a blind trust when he took office as the law requires. We know he or says he did that. But the question is bigger than that. The question is whether someone who spent years deepening financial ties with China, who has sat across the table from the Chinese elite, can now turn around and be the same person to confront Beijing head on when Canadian farmers are being devastated. And I think we've already seen that the answer is no. Can he be trusted to stare down the very people that he once courted? I highly doubt it. When have you done that? So far, the answer looks like a resounding no. Carney talks tough on security. He tries to anyway. He calls China Canada's biggest threat. But when the tariffs actually come, when the retaliation hits our farmers, his government is nowhere to be found in any assistance whatsoever. No cabinet minister flies to Beijing, no high-profile mission to the Chinese capital, just quiet statements about dialogue and remaining open to engagement. That isn't leadership, though. That's timidity dressed up as a diplomacy, and it doesn't work. In fact, he knows it doesn't work. He just doesn't care. And then we've got the gong show of the BC orders. If you think this couldn't get more absurd, go to BC. Because we just need to go not too far to remind you about the BC ferries fiasco. See, in 2023, as China was hammering Canadian canola and meat producers, BC Ferries, a provincially owned corporation, awarded a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars to not a Canadian-owned shipyard, but a Chinese state-owned shipyard to build new ferries. That's right. While Canadian farmers were being punished by Beijing's tariffs, Canadian taxpayer dollars were being handed over to Beijing again. A Beijing industrial machine, no less. And even BC's own transportation minister admitted that he was a little bit worried about sourcing ferries from a country actively harming our economy. Oh, really? Why are you worried about that, I wonder? And yet, the deal went ahead anyway. Ottawa didn't stop it. And in fact, the Federal Canada Infrastructure Bank helped to finance the damn thing. So while farmers are bleeding cash thanks to China's trade war on them, Canadian governments are still signing checks to the Chinese shipbuilders. Go figure. If that's not a policy contradiction and an absolute slap in the face to our prairie farmers, I don't know what is. And if that's not evidence of either incompetence or complicity, I don't know what is. Let's be honest. I mean, that is truly what has happened here. And yet, we could just stop talking, and what do we hear? What do we hear? Silence. Let's step back. Why do we hear more about Trump's tariffs than China's? Because our media likes the Trump story. Let's be honest. It's easy. It fits their narrative of the loud, unpredictable American president picking on poor little Canada. It sells clicks. It fills airtime. It sells advertising. It's politically useful to the liberals. But China? Well, that's a trickier story because it doesn't fit the public narrative right now. If the public realized Beijing was hitting us harder than Washington ever did, people would start asking why we still send billions of dollars to China in contracts like the ferries. Why our politicians seem hesitant to fight back, and whether our prime minister is truly free to act against a country he once helped to finance. And that's a conversation the liberals, the media, and yes, Mark Carney himself do not want Canadians to have. That's the reality. That's why the silence. They don't want you talking about it. But we are. And here's the thing. We have to figure out, where do we go from here at this point? Where does this leave us as a country? Canada cannot continue down this path of selective outrage. We cannot scream when the US plays hardball and then shrug it off entirely when China kneecaps our poor farmers. We need honesty. We need our leaders to admit that Beijing is waging economic warfare on us, and that the cost is real. It's jobs lost, even if they're self-employed. It's communities hurt. It's billions drained from our agricultural heartland. That's the reality that the country faces with this right now. We need a government willing to confront China with the same urgency it confronts Washington, supposedly, and willing to rally allies, willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people bearing the brunt of these tariffs, with our farmers. Because I'm telling you, farmers, right now, if you're watching, we hear you and we see you. And most of all, we need transparency. Canadians deserve to know whether their prime minister is truly fighting for them, or whether he's compromised by his own history of financial entanglements with the very regime that is targeting us. And it's not even a target. They've done it already. Because right now, what we have is silence from our government and from our media. We have cover-ups. We have contradictions like the BC ferries deal that make a mockery of everything Ottawa says about standing up to China. And until we demand better, until we demand leadership that actually puts Canada first, this silence will continue, and Beijing will keep winning this war. So let me leave you with this. The next time you hear the Liberals banging on about Trump's tariffs, ask yourself this question: why aren't they talking about China? The next time you see Mark Carney lecturing about fiscal discipline, which we saw yesterday, he knows we can hear him, right? And global trade, of course, ask yourself, whose side is he really on? And the next time you hear the media obsessing over a minor spat with Washington, remember that while they distract you with that circus, farmers in the prairies are being crushed under a 100% tariff that's a wall that was built by Beijing, not Donald Trump. This isn't just bad policy. This is betrayal by omission. Our farmers are being omitted out of this. Those tariffs are being omitted. And Canadians deserve to know this truth. So what do you think? Put it in the discussion below. Is the silence around China deliberate? Is Mark Carney compromised by his history with Beijing banks? And why do you think our politicians scream about Trump as much as they do, but whisper about Xi Jinping? Drop your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bakes on Things Daily, because the one thing you can count on here is that we're going to shine a light on the stories the establishment would rather you never heard. We'll see you tomorrow.